The Good Teacher Project is a collection of interviews conducted with instructors at the University of Minnesota who have been designated excellent pedagogues. This project validates the reflective processes dedicated teachers go through while perfecting their pedagogy. It is not intended to be a prescriptive formula for good teaching. All of the teachers involved in this project are intensely engaged in the teaching and learning taking place in their classrooms. They demonstrate a knowledge and respect for learning and their students, which make them role models for new teachers entering the university system. Winner of the AT&T Award for Excellence in the Instruction of Engineering Students, he came to the Engineering Research Lab at the University of Minnesota in 1972 and has professional staff since 1980. Co-author of the nationally acclaimed book on collaborative group work, Active Learning, Cooperation in the College Classroom, he has been instrumental in efforts to reform undergraduate education in engineering and the math and sciences. Our guest today is Karl Smith.
Karl Smith, you are considered a good teacher and an expert in cooperative learning. What is cooperative learning, and how does it differ from regular university instruction?
Cooperative learning is a way of helping students get actively involved in the classroom. In many college classrooms, students are very passive. They sit and listen as one person speaks. And in a cooperative learning classroom, students are talking with one another, solving problems together, working together to learn conceptual material, to apply things that they've learned. So it's a very interactive kind of learning where there's interaction between students and faculty.
What are the benefits?
Well, when cooperative learning is done well, and it's not easy to do well, it's quite a hard way to teach because it's so different from what most college faculty have either experienced or have used themselves. When it's structured really carefully, then students typically learn more, they remember it longer, they gain better strategies for learning, they gain confidence for exploring new ideas, and there's quite a lot of stimulation from ideas from others when it's working well.
Wouldn't it be more efficient and easier just to work on presentation skills?
Well, surely there's a place for clear presentations, but my view is that very clear and entertaining lectures often misrepresent the complexity of the material. Students, after having heard a very clear lecture, often go away thinking that they have a good idea, a good understanding of the material. And then sometime later when they sit down to read further or to answer some questions or solve some problems, they find that they really don't have such a good idea of what the lecture was all about. And through cooperative learning, its variety of forms, we can enhance what students get out of a lecture. A growing body of evidence that indicates when you can explain something to someone else, that's when you really understand it, when you really know it. Listening to someone who's really good at explaining it, again, often isn't a substitute for figuring it out yourself, being able to explain it or talk someone else through it. If you think about it in this way, if you think about who learns the most in the typical college classroom, who is organized and summarized, who's presenting, who's providing rationale, justification, elaboration, who's doing the conceptual work, or who's doing the intellectual work in the typical college classroom? It's the teacher. You know, the teacher's doing most of the work. And in a cooperative learning classroom, the teacher is still doing a lot of work, but it's a different kind of work. Instead of telling hour after hour, we're coaching, we're guiding, creating examples, problems, activities, exercises that try to get the students to grapple with the material, rather than just having the faculty member grapple with the material.
You've told me that cooperative learning reflects really what's happening out in the real world. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, the business and industry is moving much more toward a small group approach to formulating and solving problems. Teamwork is becoming an essential skill for many professional people, including engineers that I work with. And in cooperative learning, since it's really a student-centered but faculty-directed form of active learning, and students work as members of small teams, and so they gain skills for working as a member of a team. They learn how to provide leadership, how to communicate effectively, how to deal with differences of opinion. And in well-structured cooperative groups, there's a lot of controversy, a lot of disagreement, because it's an environment where you try to encourage people to contribute their ideas and their opinions, and then discuss them openly.
You've written a little bit about problem-based learning. How is that different from the traditional model in science teaching?
Problem-based learning from a medical school, the McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, was developed in about 1968. And in the problem-based approach to learning, the idea is to give the problem first, and then have the students struggle to try to solve or explain or predict or to understand. And then as they grapple with the problem, to decide how much they already understand, what they know, and then figure out how you're going to work with what it is that they know. It's an idea that Harvard has picked up, for example, in their New Pathways medical program. And other places have picked it up too, but it works very well in engineering, because engineers spend a lot of time formulating and solving problems, but in work and in their professions. But in school, they typically are given some theory and then examples afterwards. So problem-based learning, like cooperative learning, is much more realistic. It's the way that engineers and, again, most people have to work in the world. They're faced with a problem first, or some difficulty or challenge, and they need to develop skills and confidence for formulating and solving problems. Other ideas that are central in that cooperative learning are the idea of interdependence, where you work together to learn material or to solve a problem, but also, at the end of the day, each person is responsible. So there may be an individual quiz or an oral exam, or sometimes randomly inviting people to present the group solution. And so it's that combination of, let's work together to learn this material, to get this job done, and let's make sure that each one of us can perform the task, can do the work, can explain our group's answer at the end of the day. And it's that combination of interdependence and accountability that really makes cooperative learning a very powerful idea.
At the beginning of this process, there's some relationship building going on, and just group formation. How do you?
Well, there's a basic principle in cooperative learning that says, before you ask students to do hard academic work, before you ask them to put their ideas out on the table, to kind of bare their soul, so to speak, it's really important that you try to build up some familiarity, some comfort in these groups. And I do that typically by helping students get to know one another a little better. I have students in my classes all wear name tags. And my classes have typically 80 to 100 students. And it's hard for students, and I change groups periodically. And it just helps them get to know one another and to be able to refer to one another by their first name. It also helps me a great deal to learn the student's name by having their name and a face in close proximity. By the end of the term, I probably know 2/3 to 3/4 of the students' names. If I see them in the hall, I remember. I ask them to do things like learn their first name or the way they prefer to be addressed. Share something about their work experience, for example. What kinds of engineering work experience have they had? Or, I sometimes do things just for fun. Last week in the upper division civil engineering course that I have, I'd given the mid-quarter exam. We're moving on to a new topic, and I needed some kind of a transition. This is a 2-hour class, and going straight from the exam into a new group, new problem is kind of a rough transition. So I asked them, in your new group, find out what these folks are looking forward to at spring break. Let's get some ideas for spending spring break. And it was just a delightful time. People shared things. Some were studying for the EIT exam. Someone else was going to go to Florida. Someone else was going to work. And it was just a really neat transition. I also asked them right after that, what was the most difficult problem they ever worked on? And that brought the focus back to working on problems, back to engineering. And then we just moved right into the new problem, one that they'd never seen before. And it just made it, such a transition. A lot of groups struggle because there isn't any attention paid to the group building or team building activities. Monitoring and processing are also very important parts, and that is there needs to be some team building at the beginning, but there needs to be continual monitoring and continual processing, continually asking these groups, what's going well in your group? What are some things your group is doing really well? And early on, students will say things like, oh, we use our time well, we get the job done, we listen to one another. And then you need to continue to do that and continue to kind of move the level of the group processing. Also, you have to ask them what's not going so well. What do you need to work on? And it's things like, well, we have trouble getting everybody to show up on time. Sometimes someone dominates. But through processing, most of the groups get better at working together than when they started.
We've tried at times in this course to get you to know each other a little bit better, as well as to accomplish things within your group. That's always a good goal when you're working in a group, to get something done, but also to improve your relationships for the future. And we'd like a little exercise, which is an entree to our bigger exercise after the break here. We'd like you to draw a grid, and Karl's drawing a example here on the overhead that lists the group members at the top, and within the cells we're just going to ask some questions that we'd like each person to talk about their experience. So the question for this first row of cells here that'll lead into our next exercise is, what construction experience have you had? We'd like you to think about that. Tell each of your other group members what experience you've had. Record it in this grid. Hang on to this grid. We'll ask some more questions throughout.
I worked for a construction company for just about a week or so. Just a short little. Abrahamson Construction, just a private contractor. I just helped them on various projects, remodeling, roofing.
Is that Twin Cities based?
No, I was up in Duluth. Guess that's primarily all of it.
So you're Mr. Builder. You're Norm. How about you, Amy?
I worked at Twin City Testing for 3 years, GME Consultant for 2, and American Engineering for 2, basically doing field and laboratory testing. So you're out on the construction site about 40% of the time.
What did you build yourself?
I built myself.
Constructed.
I didn't really build anything, I just tested the stuff. Things I've built myself, I can remember my toothpick bridge for physics. Do you remember those?
I remember that.
My daughter's dollhouse, I built her a big dollhouse last year.
There we go.
You're up, Phil.
Okay, I built a changing table for my son with dressers and drawers, so here's a changing table. My wife and I, even years ago, bought an old rundown house and fixed it up, and we just recently sold it. And, so we did all the sanded the floors, we put in tile, knocked out walls.
So basically,
Did you ever live there?
all the home
What's that?
construction.
Did you live there at all?
Yeah, we lived there the whole time. We were without a kitchen for 8 months. Anyway, and I work as a construction inspector right now, so...
Oh, you're a construction inspector for what?
Consultant firm. Engineering. So I watch them build roads. I don't really do it. So participate. Okay, Mike?
My construction experience is somewhat limited. I helped my parents build their dock for the cabin, and then my parents also built an extra room out of their house, and I did a lot of the roofing. I was up there with, but that's basically my construction experience. Kind of limited.
You've said that there are informal techniques for using cooperative learning and then formal techniques. Could you differentiate that for us?
Sure, the informal techniques are these very short-term, ad hoc sorts of things, like the turn to your partner. The example I used earlier of turn to your partner and come up with at least one question between you. That can be done in any size classroom. The 1-minute paper where you say, write down the 3 most important things you learned in one question, you can add to that. Now turn to the person next to you. See what's on his or her list. Compare, make one list. By doing that, you can have your reading. You know, if you collect one from each 2 people, that's a compilation of their individual work, you typically get a better list and you have half the amount of paper to read. Other simple techniques, the informal, are things like a focused question, where you'll ask a question, have students reflect on it individually, maybe jot down some ideas, and then turn to the person next to them and carefully to what the person next to them has said.
Major learnings, implications, how will I use what I learned. If you could take out a paper, put your name on it, we'll collect this at the end like we did last time. And what we'd like you to focus on is what were the major learnings from chapters 1 and 2, which were your readings from last week. So find a partner and compare your notes.
People governing themselves, having, they're called like all different things, but like self-governed units.
Those quality type circles type stuff that Japanese are trying to implement?
It's not quality circles. Quality circles have a really bad rap.
So this is more of a
This is more,
management.
everyone's responsible. Like if you are developing something, if you're working on something, if you're managing something, you're responsible for what you're doing. So the quality of your area is dependent, even if it's not your job.
Okay, so you're overlapping in the other areas of development, and marketing, and
Yeah, well,
manufacturing.
but something else I said is that this approach I use in my own life. This is how I organize my own life. This is how I organize my student. I don't work right now, but yeah, I have used it at work. And it's a way
Does it make a
of...
difference?
Yeah, it really does make a difference because instead of, as a manager, having to manage the people who work under me, I can instead give them responsibility. If they're having problems, they come to me instead of me going to them. It means that I can do more. I can use my time more effectively because they're using their time effectively.
Did you have trouble implementing this?
The formal, those are the hard ones. That's where formal means there's a lot of structure. It means students are assigned to groups, they have fixed membership. For example, when I assign students to groups, I collected quite a lot of information on the students. Their work experience, their computing experience, their travel experience, some of their course experience, and then I try to make these groups very diverse experience. And so I try to mix people up a lot. And I assign them, I print a list, and when students come back to you, so I'll hand it out one day as they're leaving and say, when you come back to class the next day, find these people and sit with them. And then I do some of the team building things. Formal groups always have a fixed task. It may be solve a problem, write a report. In my classes, it's typically a group project where they get a relatively complicated problem to work on or an open-ended project, and they have a couple weeks to do it. I give them a little time during class to get organized and decide who's going to do what and how they're going to meet. The bulk of the work, though, takes place outside of class. And so they produce a single product. All of their names go on it. It's usually typewritten or done on a computer. Usually has quite a lot of analysis and interpretation, so an extensive discussion. I then evaluate them, and the product gets one grade, and each person who contributed to it gets the same grade. And that's a small part of a student's overall individual grade for the course, maybe 20%, maybe 30% in some classes. All the rest of the student's individual grade comes from individual exams, individual projects. So there's a combination of work together, produce a common product, gets evaluated, and do it on your own. Your task, how many know what a simply supported being is?
Yes.
What's a simply supported being? It's not a cantilever, right? What's the difference between a cantilever beam and a simply supported beam? Two supported. Right, two supports, and it's not attached. It's not anchored. Your job will be to use some of these fairly straightforward construction materials, two supports with attachments, and make the longest paper beam that you can from one sheet of paper that will support this quarter-pound mass right in the middle. Okay, right in the middle. Your final design may use one sticky file folder label. So one sheet of paper, one sticky file folder label, and your goal is to span the largest possible distance.
So we're going to have to tear this in pieces. Okay. And we'll put it at like 2 midpoints. And we want to keep it in a triangle shape. All right. So like that. Okay. Oh, this is fun. Oh, cool. I like the colors. Cool. You know, if you got to get up at 8 o'clock, this isn't too bad things to be doing.
Okay.
It's going to work.
Wait, we need more here. We
We did. Okay, well, here.
No, wait. We can still...
No, we can only use one. Let's see how this works. We can just take the paper.
Let's start with the supports closer in.
Okay.
Triangular shape.
Yay!
Works.
All right.
The thing is...
What else do we do?
Okay.
Now let's try a little bit farther out.
We get one of these two.
Okay.
See, the problem is these things are folding.
Okay, hold it.
Because it's a good idea.
Hold.
You just talked about each person's contribution.
Okay, you guys get
You know,
one
the
more
circular
shot.
cross-section, the tearing the paper, etc.
Originally, we came up with an I-beam idea, but however, that didn't work as well as we were hoping it would. Deb came up with the circular type idea because that would it would work better.
Well, I just said that.
With that original one, we came up with how long was it? 71, 70, something like that.
Then we added a couple more by ripping it in half. But it was Jen's idea to rip it in half and roll it up.
It was about a 2/3 layering of the paper, so we'd have the adequate strength in the middle to support the weight and adequate support at the ends too.
I want you to take a few minutes, about 3, and individually reflect on this experience, on what you've just done. What did you learn about building paper beams? What are some of the heuristics that are useful for making longer beams? What are some of the design strategies you use? And then, most importantly, what did you notice about your project life cycle? What happened first, then what happened? You know, kind of think your way through the last half hour or so. What did you notice? I'd like you to keep thinking about this because what you did in your groups was the entire project life cycle. So formal, there's a huge variety of formal. Things like jigsaw, which is an alternative to lecture where you divide up conceptual material. Each person takes a different piece, prepares it with someone who has the same section that they do, and then comes back and talks each other through the material in a small group, say of 3. Some people love it, others hate it, but most students see it as doing less work. And I hear things like, oh, you mean I only have to learn 1/3 of this? And of course the idea is they have to learn it all, they only prepare 1/3. Jigsaw is something I use commonly. It's a nice alternative to lecture for covering material, so to speak. I do lots of group tests. I never give an individual exam without giving them a chance to prepare together in a group. So they produce one set of answers for a kind of a mock exam. It does wonders for lowering the anxiety. I mean, students get some practice on an exam. They become familiar with the kinds of questions that I write, the kinds of problems that I expect them to be able to do, and they get a lot of help from others. Also gets them rolling on it a week or 2 before the individual exam is scheduled rather than the night before or the weekend before. So those are 2 examples, jigsaw and group test. The group project is another one where they have to come up with one report. There are probably 20, 30 different ways of structuring formal cooperative learning. These are sometimes called scripts, which are useful, but the main idea in cooperative learning is we try to help faculty learn a set of principles, the ideas of interdependence, accountability, the importance of face-to-face interaction, helping them learn skills for working with others, the group skills, and structuring processing. And we try to help them, faculty, learn in conceptual ways so that they can apply it, they can kind of personalize it to their own students, their own personality, the way that they prefer to work. So it's not a cookbook at all. It's not a recipe-oriented approach. It's much more conceptual, flexible, adaptable, which makes it hard to learn initially, but over the long run it makes it much more effective.
How do you end up with grades for the individual students at the end of the quarter with all these group projects going on?
It's a combination, again, of individual measures, individual exams, individual projects, and group projects. Now, it's not necessary to give group grades to call it cooperative learning. That's a misnomer. Some people say, well, cooperative learning means giving group grades. What's essential is having interdependence, things like a common goal. But it might be a learning goal, that you're in it together to learn this material. You're not finished until everyone can explain it. Sometimes you have role interdependence, where different students are assigned a different function within a group. One person records, one person checks, one person manages the resources. That creates another kind of interdependence. And there are several sorts of ways of structuring the interdependence. Reward interdependence, or giving a common grade, is only one way and not necessary. If you're getting a lot of opposition from students, they think it's unfair, although that's typically not the case. But if students are resisting working together toward a common grade, there's no need to do it. The advantages of talking through material together is often rewarding enough. Just having giving students a chance to talk through the material, to solve problems together, is often it's a reward in itself, or an incentive in itself.
Do students like cooperative learning?
It's hard for them. It's hard for many students. A typical comment, and I often do what are called process checks. I ask them periodically, what's going well in this course? What would you like to see continued? Are you getting your money's worth? And what's not going so well? What would you like to see changed? And a typical comment that I hear is, this group work is really hard, but please keep it up.
Karl Smith, thanks for talking to us about good teaching.
My pleasure.